Happy New Year, everybody. How are y'all doing today? I'm doing great because, I don't know, there's just something special about recording and uploading the first video of the new year. I wanted to have this out on the 1st, but unfortunately I couldn't. But whatever, we're here now, and we're gonna talk about something a bit different today, because after I finished covering the Game Awards, Salt, the mines have been a bit dry. And so one of the things I did was I went to check in on Dreamcast Guy, and I actually saw a video of his that caught my attention, which was about the leaked PlayStation sales figures for their games, and it interested me enough to the point where I think it's something we can talk about. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show anything because, you know, I don't want to risk getting the video or even the whole channel taken down, but just type PlayStation sales leaks into Google and you can find it pretty easily yourself. But before we talk about the leaks, I want to thank today's sponsor, Ewin.
Ouchie. Oh, hey, how's it going? Ow. You ever go skiing for the first time in a long time, and then your legs hurt like crazy for a few days after? Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on right now, which is why I'm not walking in. Yeah, I went skiing on New Year's Eve, and now my legs are in absolute agony even a few days later, so I spent most of my time sitting. Luckily, sitting has not been too much of an issue because, okay, you know what? We're gonna just, get on my knees. Luckily, it hasn't been a problem, because I have this very comfortable gaming chair from Ewin, the sponsor of today's video. They make super comfy gaming chairs that actually have really nice back support. I actually have mild scoliosis, and this chair has been super comfortable for me. But not only that, if you remember the last ad I did for Ewin, you might remember that I had the Phasmophobia plushie and a cup of hot chocolate. And I was saying, oh, well, what if I managed to spill it by accident? Well, then I would be good. Yeah, after I filmed the ad, I actually did end up spilling some hot chocolate on the chair. And guess what? Because it has super nice stain-resistant leather, it just came right off. I mean, look at this. Here, hold on. I'll take you over here for a second. Can you even tell that I spilled anything on the chair? I mean, seriously, the only thing you could really see is the butt cheek groove I've been working in. But not only is the chair super comfortable and stain-resistant, it also must have been hit in the gym at some point, because this model that I have in particular can hold 400 pounds, and most of their chairs can hold 300 pounds. And if you happen to be in a situation like me where walking is difficult, luckily these wheels are super nice. I can just slide all around as much as I want. And look, no issues whatsoever. I'll even do a little spin for you. Woo! And in case all that wasn't enough, I'm happy to announce that I have a discount to offer you. If you click the link in the description and use code KK552 at checkout, you'll save 20% off your order. And as Dreamcast Guy would say, 20% is pretty big. So if you're interested, be sure to check it out. And once again, thank you so much to Ewin for sponsoring this video. And now let's go ahead and get right into the leaks.
All right, so like I said before, I can't show the chart that I'm going to be reading off of because I don't want to get anything taken down. And I guess just for the sake of it, I'm going to say take this with a grain of salt, just on the off chance that this is fake or inaccurate or whatever you want to say. Now that I think about it, saying take this with a grain of salt is kind of like saying allegedly, but whatever. So this chart is divided up into 3 big sections. We have the sell-in units, the sell-through units, and the net sales. Now, in case you don't know what that means, let me break it down real quick. Sell-in means that is basically what the retailers bought and what they agreed to sell and all that type of stuff. Basically, sell-in is the games that you see on store shelves. Sell-through are games that actually got off the shelves and went to customers. And then net sales is how much money Sony got from the sales of the games. Though it's important to note that is not profit, it is just revenue. Now within these categories, they show a lot of their major games, the number of units or sales, and then the breakdown by how much was in America, how much was in Europe, and how much was in Japan and Asia. And what's extra helpful is this chart breaks up the years into 2020, 2021, and according to the leaks, this actual chart was from February 2022. So any game that's not under a specific year, I'm going to assume that those sales specifically are just as of February 2022. Now, yes, this information may be a bit old at this point, but it's still interesting to look at nonetheless. Now, I'm just going to be taking a look at the things that caught my mind. The first of which was Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. As you can imagine, since it came out in 2021, this is under the category that doesn't have a specific date. So basically that means as of February 2022, 2022, this game sold 2.34 million copies, 42% of which were in America, 50% were in Europe, and 8% were in Japan and Asia. And according to the chart, at the time, Sony had made 145 million off the game. Now, this is interesting specifically because this goes against what we saw in those slideshows from the other leaks. Because if you remember, those slideshows suggested that the game had a budget of 81 million and missed the mark by $8 million. But if it's true that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart did have a budget of 81 million, that would mean that according to this chart, they made their money back. Because according to this chart, it made $145 million. So definitely really weird to think about. And before we move on to the 2021 and 2020 sales numbers, something that was really interesting to me about these sales that didn't have defined dates was the fact that we see God of War PC and Days Gone PC on here. And God of War PC had just come out at this point, so seeing that it had made $2 million at this point isn't really surprising. But what's really interesting to me is Days Gone PC, because according to the chart, the game made $22 million up to this point. Although despite the game coming out almost a year before this chart was supposedly made, we don't get to see the sell-through data. Now that makes sense for God of War because again, it had literally just come out when this chart was made. But the fact that we don't see it for Days Gone is really weird to me. Now going down the chart further, we're going to be taking a look at the sales of games as of 2021. Now something to note is the chart says fiscal year 2021 titles total, but pretty much all these games came out in 2020 or before. So I'm not 100% sure if these sales are just from 2021 or if they're from as of 2021. But I think it's reasonable to assume that this is including 2020 and prior years. Because looking under the 2020 category, it shows Spider-Man selling 22 million, God of War selling 20 million. And obviously all of those sales didn't just happen in 2020. And also something that's interesting is the 2021 chart includes some very specific games which all seem to have come out in 2020. And those games are Spider-Man Miles Morales, The Last of Us 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Demon's Souls Remake, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, Predator Hunting Grounds, and Horizon Zero Dawn PC. Now, out of all these games, Spider-Man Miles Morales actually sold the best at 10.1 million units, with 54% of those sales coming from the US, 40% coming from Europe, and 6% coming from Japan and Asia. And in total, the game made $427 million. Now, what's especially fascinating to me is when we look at The Last of Us 2, because it sold 9.6 million, which I guess is the reverse of nice, which I guess would be ECIN, but whatever. With 43% of sales in America, 47% in Europe, and 10% in Japan and Asia. And the reason this is interesting to me is because if you take a look at the revenue, they made $447 million off of The Last of Us 2, which if you remember what I said about Miles Morales, they made $427 million off of that game, which means that The Last of Us 2 sold less but made more money. And my theory for why this happened is because they probably bundled Spider-Man Miles Morales with a lot more units, and so that caused an inflation in sales numbers, but obviously they didn't actually make money off of those copies because they were bundled with consoles. So that's my theory about what happened. I mean, especially considering Miles Morales launched day one on PS5 and the PS5 version cost $70, you would expect that game to have made more money. But like I said, console bundles probably dragged down revenue a bit. Now, Ghost of Tsushima, the sales numbers I'm not really super interested in. It sold 7.4 million. I think that's about expected. 45% of the sales were in America, 36% in Europe, and 19% in Japan. The numbers that actually surprised me the most out of all the 2021 numbers were actually Demon's Souls Remake. Now, I don't know if I should be completely surprised by this or not because it was only on PS5, but this game only ended up selling 1.8 million units as of the end of 2021. 46% of the units were sold in America, 40% were in Europe, and 14% were in Japan and Asia. And in total, the game made $113 million. And what's weird is we can actually see Horizon Zero Dawn PC on here, but like with the other PC ports from before, we can't actually see the exact numbers sold. We can just see that they made $51 million. And according to this chart, 100% of the PC port money that we've talked about so far has been from America. Apparently, the PC port didn't make any money in Japan or Europe, which is definitely weird to me. I don't know if that's completely accurate. But now we get into by far the biggest section, and that is sales as of fiscal year 2020. Now, like I said before, the top two games, and this probably isn't surprising to anybody, were Spider-Man and God of War, with Horizon in third place. Spider-Man sold 22 million units, God of War sold just under 21 million, and Horizon sold 19 million. For Spider-Man and God of War, 50% of the sales were in America, while Horizon actually breaks the trend, selling 43% of its copies in America and actually selling more in Europe at 44%. Then we continue down the list. Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us Remastered both sold 18 million as of this point. Then we have a drop to 12 million sales with Gran Turismo Sport. And then I know you guys were probably curious about this one, so I'm going to talk about it. Bloodborne ended up selling 7.4 million copies, which this just perplexes me even more. The game sold 7 million copies, made $265 million, which is nearly the same amount as Ghost of Tsushima, yet they still refuse to master it, even for just PS5. Like, even if you're not going to remaster it for PC, at least remaster it for PS5. Then following Bloodborne in sales is Days Gone, but the next game that caught my eye was actually Ratchet & Clank PS4, which I've never played it, and I haven't been a part of the Ratchet & Clank community like ever, but I've talked to actual Ratchet & Clank fans, and they have told me that Ratchet & Clank PS4 is widely considered to be one of the worst, if not the worst games. Though surprisingly, it still managed to sell 6.9 million units. Nice. And most of the sales were actually in Europe at 56%, with 39% in the US and 5% in Japan. And then this one is probably the biggest surprise to me on this entire list. Following Ratchet & Clank PS4, we actually have God of War 3 Remastered, which sold 5.5 million units, 48% of which in the US, 35% in Europe, and 16% in Japan. And then finally, moving down to the end of the list, there's Little Big Planet 3, Detroit Become Human, Uncharted The Lost Legacy, Infamous Second Son, Drive Club, Death Stranding, and Until Dawn, which I actually kind of thought Death Stranding would do better. It only sold 4.1 million units and was actually most popular in the UK at 45% sold. So now that we've kind of gone through the whole chart, I want to give my thoughts on this and just sort of explain what this means to me or what this says to me. The first thing I noticed is that Spider-Man, which is clearly their best-selling first-party game, at least based on this chart, sold 22 million, which, don't get me wrong, that's very good, especially for being exclusive to one platform. But that really tells me that even their best-performing exclusive only had a 1-to-6 attach rate to their console, meaning that only 1 in every 6 people who bought a PlayStation bought the best-selling first-party game there. Because a lot of people out there like to talk about how important exclusives are, but with this data, I don't know, it's just really interesting to see. This really makes me question just how important exclusives actually are. And going back to the whole discrepancy between this chart and the leaked slideshow about whether or not Ratchet & Clank made a profit, I really have to wonder which one is more accurate. Because again, the slideshow suggests that the game was a flop, but this chart suggests that the game was a success. And honestly, I'm more inclined to believe this chart. And the second major thing that I took away from this is the fact that Japan, which is where Sony is from, at most participates in 21% of sales. And the only 2 games that applies to are Bloodborne and Death Stranding, which is particularly funny because in the last video we covered Japan hates Xbox a lot, and if this sales data reveals anything, it's that Japan isn't too fond of PlayStation either. And it actually looks like, and this is just me eyeballing it, but this chart seems to suggest that it tends to bounce back and forth between whether America is where most of the game copies are sold or Europe is. Because you have games like Rift Apart, which sold 42% in America and 50% in Europe, but then you have a game like Returnal, which sold 50% in America and 40% in Europe. Although if you go to the bottom of the chart, it tallies up everything and shows that it looks like America and Europe are actually tied, with each continent having 44% of game sales and then Japan having 12%. Although when you look at total revenue, despite America and Europe matching up in terms of percentage of games sold, America actually accounts for 53% of total revenue, while Europe accounts for 36% and Japan counts for 10%. So basically what it looks like from this chart is America makes Sony most of their money, with Europe in second place and Japan and the rest of Asia only making up a grand total of 10% of their revenue. Interesting for sure, and with all that being said, that's pretty much all I got for this video. So I guess be sure to let me know down in the comments what you guys make of this data. And when it comes to the Ratchet & Clank thing, do you trust the slideshow more or do you trust this chart more? Like I said before, I trust the chart more. I don't know, I guess the fact that it looks more professional makes me want to believe it. And yeah, with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and and I will catch you all next time.